Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, episode 12, MunchaKoopas. Very excited to be chatting with MunchaKoopas. Hello, MunchaKoopas. How you doing?
Hello, I'm doing great. I hope my cat does not distract us too much tonight.
Oh, this is awesome. What's the name of the cat?
His name is Indy.
Indy. Hello, Indy. How you doing? No, I'm glad Indy could join us. So, first of all, there's a lot to get to, but let's how did you get into video games, and where does your video game story start? Because we're going to go down a couple different paths. I think it's kind of interesting to know where you started from.
So, the earliest memory I have of playing video games of any sort is on my 4th birthday. I remember it. My brother got me a Sega Genesis. I remember that very clearly. And I don't remember, at some point around the same time, possibly the same day, my sister got me an NES. But the earliest game I remember playing was some racing game on the Genesis. And to this day, I cannot find out what it was.
Oh, no.
I can't find video of it. I can't find pictures, anything. I've gone through every racing game list for Genesis that I can find. I don't know what it was, and I can't find it.
There are some great racing games on the Genesis, too.
There are, and unfortunately, I've looked at all of them, and none of them are what I played.
Dang.
Yeah, but one of the first, very popular games I ever played was Sonic the Hedgehog 2, because my brother would just get me stuff at garage sales and bring it home. I remember playing it over and over and over, just trying to understand it, because here I am between the ages of 5 and 7 going okay, how the heck do I go? It felt so different from anything else I had tried, but it was also very fun. And I eventually got to the final level, and I did beat it, and I had never felt more accomplished in my young life.
I can't believe you actually beat that as a kid.
Neither can I. I also beat The Legend of Zelda at the age of 7. The
What?
first one. Yeah.
Okay, you were an overachiever. I can already tell.
I used to have the whole map memorized. I don't anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, I used to beat that one occasionally. That was actually a hobby I had growing up. I mean, as I'm sure for a lot of speedrunners, is playing your favorite games over and over. But I used to have every item location and trainer and what Pokemon they had memorized in Pokemon Emerald. I knew where to catch everything and all that stuff.
I am so impressed.
Those skills ended up serving me well, as you might imagine. Luckily, but yeah, video games have always been a part of my life, much to my family's chagrin sometimes, because it's you'll rot your brain, etc. And they were right, of course, but it still didn't stop me.
Of course. And I love that Sonic 2 is one of the games that you first beat, because I just recently played that as an adult, and I found it challenging as an adult to actually beat that game on the first playthrough. And it's such a great game. What a great way to start out your video game journey, minus the racing game.
Yeah, it's so obtuse, Zelda 1. Something I just remembered, I couldn't figure out how to save, or my cartridge was not working and I didn't understand that. But I very distinctly remember always having to start over at the beginning. And that's why I had the whole map memorized, is because if I wanted to play it and beat it, I had to do it in a single sitting. I just remember something was wrong with my cartridge, I guess. But I just remember every time I played it, I had to start from the beginning.
So it's interesting. My brothers and I realize now, I must have lived a privileged life, because we were able to beat Zelda 1 and 2, but we had the guides and the Nintendo. We had every possible thing you could think of at the time that could help you beat the game. But if you didn't have that, how would you remember all that?
I don't know. I got used to doing it all over and over and over again. Oh yeah, the sword upgraded is way up here, but you have to do this thing over here before you can get it for some reason. I don't know. But yeah.
Well, so okay, so I love that's it's great that those games are your first choice. When's the first time then you even considered or thought about a speedrun or experienced a speedrun? How did that come about?
So at some point, I think it was around the time I was 15, what year would that be? That would have been 2006.
Okay.
I'm dating myself there.
I'm older than you, you're good.
But I was playing New Super Mario Brothers on the DS, and I just remember I realized like you could skip a bunch of worlds by going directly for the cannons and whatnot, and I knew exactly how to do it and where to get all the items and all that. And I'm like, I wonder how fast I could do this. And I played it, and I'm sure I did it in like under an hour. Um, at like around that time, it was probably very sloppy. Obviously, I had no strats to go over. I was just like,
Sure.
yeah, I think this is what you do. Um, and then I remember when my friends and I found out about backwards long jumping in Mario 64, we tried, like, we got out the virtual console and tried doing that, and that was all we did for a Saturday until, like, I eventually clipped through a wall. Um, but, like, other than that, like, I didn't do any serious speedrunning until 2014. I always had fun doing, like, challenge stuff in games, like doing tons of out of bounds stuff in Halo 2, beating it on Legendary with friends. Like doing stuff like that was always a popular thing for me. So
Was there like a run or a runner or maybe even some glitch of, or that inspire, or like that you experienced that said, hey, maybe you want to try breaking games, that
uh I'm sure there was at some point. Like the Mario 64 stuff was probably like one of those things like, oh, games can do this. Sword flying in Halo 2, I think was another one of those. Like just seeing yourself zoom across an entire map if you did it right
it's
was
crazy.
it was always very rewarding. Um what I just remembered, one of my earliest like exposures to like speedrunning in general was the show Cinematech on G4 TV. And what this show was, for anyone that does not know, is essentially they would show like game trailers or game footage. Like that was it, and they
Right.
would show just that for like half an hour. I had no idea how they had the rights to do this, but it was
Okay.
amazing. I'm sure you can find episodes on YouTube or something. But occasionally during an episode they would have like the episode would start with a playthrough of like The Legend of Zelda or Symphony of the Night or a Circle of the Moon. I remember seeing a Richter speedrun of one of the two Castlevanias he's in for on like the PlayStation.
Oh, wow.
um Mind you, I had never heard of Castlevania at the time. I just remember seeing someone kicking a lot and like doing some cool looking stuff, and I'm like, oh, that was neat. But I don't even know if they called it a speed run, but they just like they had it up, and there was also a timer in the bottom right corner, and so they'd play that for a couple minutes, and then they'd go back to what they usually played. But then like every time before and after they would go to break, they would bring up the speed run again. And it'd be like, oh wow, he's already like here, and they would always have it picture in a picture in the corner, so you could still like pay attention to it. Um, and I don't know, it just made me realize like, oh, people enjoy doing that, like, and I enjoy doing that. That's cool.
I'm glad you mentioned G4 because even before, I think was it Tech TV before then, whatever it was before then, but it was a place you could actually see video games being played, and on TV there just wasn't a lot of that. You had, and I don't, that might have been before YouTube. I don't even, no, maybe YouTube was around by then, but
uh no, it was before YouTube for a little bit, but
yeah.
if you didn't have internet like I did, like I didn't have internet for a long time.
Oh, wow.
So like G4 TV was my whole like world
Yeah.
once I found it, until it was eventually gone, but
Right.
um
But for us geeks,
yeah.
it was like the coolest thing, and I didn't. What a great way to present a speed run. I mean, I hadn't even thought, like, I didn't even realize at the time, but I know exactly what you're talking about. But I haven't thought about it. That had to
Mhm.
have like had some influence on myself as well, because it was seeing video games at what I considered like a really high level at that time, which was really awesome.
Mhm.
Totally agree. That's so cool. So when did you decide then to like record your first speed run, and what was that speed run?
It was probably Shovel Knight, and it was definitely in 2014. The very like first stream I ever did was just a test stream of Electronic Superjoy.
What the hell is that?
Actually, it's a 2D platformer where the game was made like to go along with the music that was composed. And they recently had a sequel. It's like one of those tough as nails type
Oh,
platformers.
got it.
Like it's pretty fun, but it's also, I don't know, it's okay. I like it though.
Dog in the
Um,
chat says that it's a great game. So there's at least one fan out there in the chat. That's pretty awesome.
yeah.
Okay, so that's cool. So then that leads to the inevitable question: how did you come up with a screen name? Like, what? How did you? Is there an origin story behind your screen name?
So it's like in 2014, I had just finished college. I was a music major, and I couldn't play anymore due to an injury, but I still wanted to like scratch that performance itch. And for some strange reason, I don't know why, maybe it was just the freedom of finally not having to go to school anymore. Um, I really wanted to play more video games, so I decided I'm going to try and be a Twitch streamer. I'm really good at video games. I'm sure I can entertain people somehow. Um, it didn't really work out, of course, but it worked out in other ways. Um, But my first Twitch account that I made, like no one could pronounce the username. It was Quixitry, but people kept pronouncing it like Keyhitry or something. So I decided to delete that account because like, okay, if people can't even pronounce this, I don't want to use it. And I was trying to figure out like a new username, and I'm not a very original person. I'll be upfront with that. Um, but my favorite game growing up was Yoshi's Island. I played that first on the Game Boy Advance. Actually, I didn't know what a Super Nintendo was until 2004. Um, so anyway, my favorite game is Yoshi's Island, and like the around the same time that I was trying to make a new username, there was some article about like someone found a like pre-release pamphlet for Super Mario World, and it had like little character bios and everything, and it revealed this like it's an official Nintendo document, by the way, so this is canon as far as I
Yeah.
understand. Um, but it said that Yoshi is actually short for his full name. It's a nickname, and his full name is T. Yoshisaur MunchaKoopas.
What?
And I thought, and I thought MunchaKoopas just sounded silly. It suited me because I'm kind of silly sometimes. And more importantly, like my favorite game growing up was Yoshi's Island, so I figured it would be a good reference at least. Plus, anything with like 4 syllables is just really nice. You know, it's very singable, it's clappable. I don't know, it's catchy.
You just blew
People
my
can call me
mind.
Muncha. Like people can call me Muncha or Koopas.
Yeah.
Um, quick note: a pet
Yeah.
peeve of mine, and I'm not trying to like yell at anyone or being like,
No.
"Grr, hey, I'm angry at you." But just like a pet peeve of mine is when people call me Munchas, just Munchas. There is no S between the Muncha and the Koopas. Please do not call me Munchas.
So if
That
you
is
see a
all.
bunch of Koopas out there, there's no S there, folks. No, that's awesome. No, that's so cool. Okay, so I got to backtrack for just 1 second because
Sure.
Mad Little Pimp mentioned it in the chat that he's the music major thing and that he plays drum and bass. And I'm still a band person to this day. I actually teach high school music and college age music, music kids, drum and bugle corps, marching band, that kind of stuff. And so
Mhm.
I think that's interesting because I have met a fair amount of people in our community who were music people growing up. And maybe it's the geek thing. I don't know what it is. Or maybe it's just the passionate about certain things, or that you have to have to be any sort of music or artist, you really have to be dedicated to it. And I feel like that's kind of the case with speedrunning and things like that as well. Did any of those things, I mean, is there any correlation there for you, or was it just something that happened to be part of your journey?
Oh no, definitely. I've always thought that there's a lot of correlation between learning a musical instrument and learning how to speedrun a video game. Like they're both an instrument to some extent. They both have their intricacies and they both have their fundamentals. Mind you, learning an instrument, of course, has hundreds of years of fundamentals sometimes. So there's more, learned ways of going about it. With a speedrun, like unless you're learning an already established game, you're essentially, you are inventing the wheel yourself. And I had to do that with a lot of Shovel Knight stuff, but um, I definitely think there's a lot of parallels between music and like learning an instrument and playing a game, at least for these purposes.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that of the instrument part. I did an interview with Mitch Flowerpower, and he specifically said he treats his controller like a musical instrument, and I
Mm,
just thought that that was so prescient. But it makes a lot of sense. It's like these are the tools we need to do these things. So
mhm.
I thought it was really cool. Okay, that's awesome. So why did you choose? What is it about Shovel Knight? Why did you choose Shovel Knight? Why is that the game that inspired you?
So Shovel Knight is very important to me for a large number of reasons. Um, like the like most prominent reason that I chose to speedrun it was probably because it came out during SGDQ 2014, and so while I was watching the event at home, I was playing the game. Um, and I just thought like I really want to get involved in this community because now I finally have the time since I'm not in school. And I had honestly been thinking about it for like the previous 2 years, but I just didn't know what game I would speedrun because I didn't know where to go to learn about these things or how I would even go about it. Anyway, um, so I played it during the event and I fell in love with all of the mechanics and everything in it because everything about it just reminded me of all the games I loved playing when I was a kid. Um, and it like much for the same reasons that a lot of people speedrun. Like I play a game that I really like to get more out of it, and Shovel Knight was one of those first games that truly sparked that in me, like as an adult. Whereas previously I just like played a game like once or twice and then I was done with it unless it was something I was like playing with friends, like a multiplayer game. But Shovel Knight just everything about it I think is so amazing, and I just wanted to play it forever. Um, Now, careful what you wish for. Just forewarning. But yeah, I still love the game. It's wonderful. But yeah,
And, and just a little heads up, so now well, okay, we'll get to the development part of this in just a sec, but I do want to
yeah.
talk. I mean, so I want to preface this by saying I've only played through Shovel Knight as a casual playthrough. I've never done the speed run of it, and I think like a lot of people, I just love the game. Everything about it. I love that it doesn't hold your hand. I love that you just get to it takes inspiration from all the games I loved as a kid. It does everything. The music is wonderful. The graphic, everything is just it's so good. And I love one of the biggest things. I love that you can still get new experiences out of it today with the DLCs and everything else that they keep doing things on it. So I'm going to try not to be too big of a fan, especially because you work there and everything. But I do want to say that I'm a really big fan of the game. What is it about so the speedrun I find utterly fascinating. And can you just maybe just touch on a couple of things that make the speedrun unique and what's kind of exciting about doing a speedrun of Shovel Knight?
Sure. So the most fun thing about speedrunning Shovel Knight for me, like specifically Shovel Knight the character, is everything you can do with the shovel. And there's a lot of very subtle timings and like tricks you can do that make this, generally considered clunky character move rather, adeptly. And once you figure that out, you really, and if you have an eye for level design, you can really see that every single one of the things like practically that we do in a speed run has to some extent been considered. Mind you, yeah, they didn't expect a lot of precise movements or like specific tricks, but with the distance of platforms and like the height Shovel Knight jumps and all of these things, the speed at which he moves, like all of it has been considered. And when you learn how to do it, it just flows like seamlessly. At least I've always felt that way. Um, but yeah, I just think it's the physics really is what really nailed me. The physics and
So
the
good.
interaction with the environment. Like
Ah,
that's what gets me.
totally agree. When you were first learning or first started doing runs, what's your approach? Were you doing the type of thing where you practice certain tricks or certain levels, or were you doing full runs? Like how do you approach a speed run like Shovel Knight?
So for me, because it was also the first game I had ever speedrun, I was also honestly trying to get my gaming chops back,
Sure.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, and when I first started it, the person to watch was Captain Drake, and he was doing any percent. And I tried doing any percent, but I kept dying everywhere. And at the time, any percent you had to break all the checkpoints. For anyone not in the know about Shovel Knight, like there's a checkpoint system, and you can physically break them to obtain more money, which allows you to buy more stuff. You can see why that's nice for the speed run because it saves a lot of time. Anyway, I kept dying, so I decided I'm just going to run low percent where you don't have to buy anything. Therefore, I don't have to break any checkpoints, and I can work on my fundamentals, if you will. So I tried to treat it honestly like learning a fighting game as well, because I had also just come off a couple of years of playing Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom
Oh, nice.
um, with my old roommates in college. So I looked at it like, okay, before I learn how to use all these relics and propeller daggers and stuff, I need to learn exactly what the shovel can do, and that's what I decided to do.
That's kind of a crazy approach. Maybe you can answer this, but in typically a low percent run is really challenging because you're not getting power ups. You're not boosting up the
hmm
character to blast through things. Is it the same way in Shovel Knight?
It's definitely the same way because obviously, like now, I can't cross as many gaps as I can with the propeller dagger. I have to be very wary of spikes at the end of like stranded ship, which can very easily kill you. But something that really appealed to me about Shovel Knight was the platforming specifically, and that if you wanted to make it a game that was just you jumping around and none of the items, you could do that. Like Shovel Knight can be played a myriad of ways. Um, and to me, what was the most fun was mastering exactly where to place the character for optimal movement, just with like the base kit. To this day, he's still my favorite platforming character ever, and for good reason.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. Still, this all this time and later, and he's still your favorite. I think that's such an interesting approach. Like a tip. So when I approach a speed run, it's what's the fastest way from point A to point B. But
hmm
considering the fundamentals, that's the way you can really master a game. So you may be able to. I'm seeing how, by the way, this leads to a career in QA. By the way, because you're learning the fundamentals of the game this way.
hmm
And that's a
Like
much
it,
different approach. That's cool.
much in the same way that an athlete internalizes, how to throw a fastball or, how to jump over a hurdle, at some point they're not thinking about, how close am I? They're just like, oh, they feel it,
Yeah.
And for me, this sounds really silly when I say it, but like I have internalized all of these actions in Shovel Knight. Like I have full mastery over this game's physics system. I know exactly like how much to press a button to move a character the amount I want to either avoid or not avoid doing whatever. Um, I forget like how I forget how much mastery I have until like our ops manager comes in and sees me play something. And she's like, I thought you were going to die at least like 7 times, but then you made it out of the pit somehow by doing some magic, and I don't understand what you're doing, but it looks really cool. I'm like, thank you.
That's definitely
But
a
yeah,
sign. How has the speed run of the game evolved since you've been playing since 2014?
it's evolved a lot. Mostly thanks to actually for someone that I learned a lot from. Was a runner named Busta Wolf. Busta Wolf, excuse me. He goes by many names, but anyway, he is still my dear friend. I actually just went to his wedding last October, um, and just he also treated Shovel Knight like learning a fighting game, and he was also someone that was he just if he had a goal, he was laser focused on it. And I am not that way, honestly. I have to try really hard to like get good at things, and he drove me a lot by just being a friend that was kind of there to be along for the ride and share with me this journey of learning how to play this strange video game. Um, but he would also he ran every category, so like he really revolutionized any percent at the time. And like back when there was still like a ton of RNG at the end of the game with where the map enemies would go, he got a really really good time and a really solid run at the time. It was a 48 like 36 or something, and he beat Drake's time by like almost a minute, I think.
Oh wow.
It was unheard of. He had used like 2 less items and just had like really good strats overall. um, and then a patch came out which removed all the map RNG, and then like basically everyone else just steamrolled over his old time. But it's just like if you go back and watch that run, there's a lot of like really cool things that go on in it, and like a lot of the things he did we still use today. And also I have to toot my own horn here, but I was one of those people that again just I didn't run any percent a lot, but I was really interested in optimizing the game. So I would go and try and learn how to do tricks. And honestly, because of a lot of my work in low percent, I figured out with a lot of help from some other runners, namely like a Zulag, like how to do a lot of things in this game. So there's a skip in Lost City that I am famous for. Pardon me. I should have grabbed a video of it to link in the chat, but anyway. If you watch any percent speedrun, there's a skip in Lost City where at the first beetle auto scroller,
Right.
and you free the blue birder enemy, and it bounces. You free it at a specific time, and it bounces in such a way that if you keep up with it, you can bounce over or you bounce off of it and skip the end of the room, and it saves a huge amount of time. And oftentimes, whenever I see a new runner get to that room, um, the first thing I say in chat is, "Hi, welcome to Lost City. I'm sorry." And they look at it and they go, "Why are you sorry?" And then they try and do the thing and like maybe they get it or they don't. And then it clicks for them. They're like, "Oh, you're that guy." Oh, like that. Mind you, that's only happened like twice. So that's not really a thing.
Hey,
But
still though.
still, it's still a joke in the community. Like I'm just like, if you're getting to Lost City, I'm very sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to be this hard. It's honestly not that hard, in my opinion. But it's one of the first big hurdles for learning the category.
Sure.
And like, there's so many things I could cite that like either I had a hand in or like I did directly, which like it sounds very egotistical, but I can back it up in this case.
No,
So
no.
like, there's a lot of strategies that are still used that I made, and that's really insane to think about, even for Plague Knight. Anyway.
No, that's. I think it's really cool to hear about because one of the things as I was doing some of my research, you're really active in the community, and a lot of at least as I'm putting the picture together, I'm like, oh no, it almost it seems inevitable that you end up being a QA tester at Yacht Club because I'm just like the seeing the way that you've broken the game up, or I should say, developed these new ways of getting through it. It makes a lot of sense to me, and you touched upon something that I find you're the first person I think I've had on who does PC or a game like Shovel Knight that's on so many different platforms and is updated and has patches and all these kind of things. How does the community, how do you decide what is on the leaderboard, or how does that, I mean, do you just guys go with what the fastest, how does that work?
So when the community first started, like when I first started a Discord server, there were literally 7 people. 7. And it's kind of always been an unwritten rule in the community that we go with whatever the current patch is, usually because one, that fixes a lot of bugs that honestly sometimes cause problems.
Sure.
I won't get into that now because there's too many to go over.
Right.
But it's the like our main goal that we initially set out for was that like we wanted Shovel Knight to be a game that no matter what console you're playing on, you have a fair shot at getting the record. So if there's like a specific trick that like, I'm very thankful this is not the case. Luckily, at least it won't be soon. Like there's no specific trick that only works on PC. Like everything you can do on PC is doable on every other system. Like by matter of technicality, if you had a third arm, the 3DS would be the most optimal system to play on. But yeah.
Why, I gotta ask, why is that?
It has a touch screen. That and the Wii U both have a touch screen you can access for faster item swaps.
Got it.
Mind you, you can also, like, this is also allowable. So like something else we've done to like also establish like, I guess comparability is a good word, or like to establish a spirit of like competitive fairness is if you're playing with keyboard, the number keys on the top of the keyboard are actually assigned to your relics. So if you're playing New Game Plus, you can just tap each one of those for immediate item switches. And for fairness, we also allow the use of joy to key on if you're playing with controller, as long as you're doing like a 1-to-1 button assignment, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And like, mind you, you don't really get a whole lot of options because we honestly do use a lot of buttons on the even a DualShock 4. But basically through this, we allow runners to then basically do the same thing and bind like their triangle button to the number 6. Right. Sorry about the Discord noises.
No, it's good. Didn't even hear him. Didn't hear him on my end. So.
Oh, good. Sorry. Ignored me. But so anyway, yeah, we like if you think about speedrunning, sometimes it's like, well, now you're using an outside program and all that, and I'm like, yes, but it's in the spirit of making the game like more fun for some people. Because like if you're like I myself, I don't like playing on a keyboard, not because it's like bad, it's perfectly fine. It's that like my wrists start to hurt if I am in that position for so long. So it's just more comfortable for me to use a controller. But just in the spirit of fairness, we allow controller runners to map some of their buttons to numbers so they can do immediate item switches for a few of them if they want. And I think that's fine personally.
No, I think it's great too. And I if I ever did decide to take on the speedrun, I appreciate that you offer all the platforms. Now, I'm one of these geeks who's bought it on 3 different platforms because it's nice on the, like you mentioned, the 3DS. It was awesome having the game on the go, like being able to just pick it up and go and play it and stuff like that. And I didn't have a Switch at the time, so but that's cool that there's consensus there, and I'm sure some of that stuff gets discussed. But I'm always curious about the patch thing, and thank you for answering that because that seems, in my opinion, you mentioned it's unwritten, but that seems like the fairest approach that everyone just because I know Odyssey comes up a lot, Mario Odyssey, where some patch breaks to something that used to save 3 minutes and now you got to think of a new way around it, and so yep. I think that's a cool way to do it. It's fair for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the case in every community I'm in. Sure. Like just a quick tangent, like Hyper Light Drifter, when it started, I've also been a part of that community since it started. It was honestly very divided between whether we would use a current patch or like the day one patch essentially.
Yeah.
And at the start, it was, the day one patch was what was displayed on speedrun.com, and it was the glitched category. Now, if you go look there, it's no major glitches on whatever the current patch is, because that was the most active category. And even then, we found ways to make the current patch any percent and glitched categories faster anyway. So it just goes to show that things change over time. And luckily, like nothing's ever really come up in Shovel Knight where it's like, oh no, we have to use this old patch because blah blah blah. Like because the newer patch is usually better.
Right, right.
In many many ways.
Oh, sure. And I guess that leads to my next question is how you end up doing QA testing for Yacht Club games. Like what how long have you been running the game? When does that start to become a thing?
Let's see. I started kind of in like the middle of 2014 speedrunning it.
Okay.
And I got accepted for my first run for GDQ a year later for SGDQ 2015. I don't know whose decision that was, but thank you. Like it honestly changed my life in many many ways.
And if you don't mind, maybe after this, would you mind chatting a little bit about GDQ? Because there's a lot to get
we
there.
Can do that.
That's how why not get through now? That's actually how I met you, and I want to hear your side of this, but I do want to say something that when I first went to SGDQ in 2018, it was my first time ever attending, and MunchaKoopas was the liaison, the runner liaison at the time. And
2018? Sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
2019 was the first event I was staff, but
what the heck were you doing? Well, for whatever reason, was it 2018? Did I get the years wrong now? It was SGDQ, and whatever reason, you were the person who met me and walked me through, and maybe it was 2019. Holy crap, my mind's going crazy now. But I know that you made me feel like a celebrity, to say the least. It was just so kind, but walked me around and everything. And that's one of the things that if you've ever run a game at GDQ, that there's they take care of everyone there. If you're a volunteer, if you're attending the event, they make you feel really good about attending the event or doing a run or whatever. And so I'm curious, what was your first experience as a runner? And then how did that lead into a world of GDQ for you?
So GDQ did not always have a runner liaison. That was actually something that Vuligin just kind of took upon himself to do.
Cool.
And then it just became that someone needed to fill that. And I offered to do that. Mind you, that is not why I was initially brought on. But I stood up and said, "Hey, I want to do that." So my first GDQ experience, the first person from the speedrun community I ever actually met in person was Vuligin.
Ah, cool.
He was working the check-in desk, and so I was like, "Oh, hi, Vuligin," because I recognized him from the previous GDQ streams. And he had been since I had a run-in, he had been popping into my stream to watch me, and he also liked the game, I guess. But anyway, I met him and was like, oh, hi, I'm Muncha. I'm here to get my badge and, learn what, everything is. Where do I need to be when, et cetera, et cetera. And, we reviewed my volunteer stuff. They asked me, where your shifts are and orientation. And I'm like, these days, these times, I'll be there. And they were like, great, we'll see you then. But yeah, he didn't. I think after that, I just kind of asked, what is the general layout of everything? He's like, well, we're all on this floor because it was very similar to this year's AGDQ where it was all one floor. It's like everything's literally next to each other. There's the practice room, there's the PC room, there's the other room, there's the stream room. That's not open yet. Have fun. I'm like, all right. I had a laptop at the time, so I just set up in the laptop and started playing while I waited for roommates to arrive. I remember Blue Glass came over and started watching. He was very polite, though. I like talking with him. He's very enthusiastic about video games, and I really liked that.
Yeah, totally.
But I had a lot of fun at my first GDQ. But essentially, just I like running at GDQ. Like I rehearsed, I practiced my butt off. I treated it with higher prestige than any performance I'd ever done in my music career. Which I'm sure my old instructor would be remiss to hear. But anyway,
don't worry, they won't hear.
And I was immediately hooked by the community of people that were just like me. They grew up playing video games. They still played video games, and they thought video games were great. And we were all coming together for a good cause. And that was also something that really appealed to me was the charity aspect, of course, yeah. And just it was seeing something that. Many people touch on this in regard to GDQ, but it's seeing something that you're told as a child will never do you any good or do anything for you or anything for the world, and then you see it raise $3 million for charity, and you're like, "Aha! Aha!
Take that!"
But essentially, I wanted to keep getting invited back, and it was very important to me at the time um, to try and be the best Shovel Knight player overall in the world, um, which is a very ambitious and somewhat foolish thing to try and be, because there's many, many people that came after me that apparently I inspired that ended up being very, very good at this game, which I'm very happy about. Um, but basically, I had the drive at the time to continue speedrunning Shovel Knight and performing at GDQ. It was very important to me. So I learned Plague Knight, and I, did a New Game Plus run, and then I didn't have a run in for SGDQ 16, unfortunately. But then I did 2 runs at the following AGDQ, and I think there's ever only of the events I've been to, the 10 that I've been to, not counting GDQX. There's only ever been like 2, maybe 3 of those that I haven't had a run in or been a backup for. And it's just I don't know. I met a lot of friends from many different walks of life. And at some point I just decided it was my goal to like become part of the staff at some point. I didn't care how. But I didn't really have I don't have any skills really other than playing video games. To be perfectly honest, I'm trying to work on that in my real life. But anyway,
No, if you don't want me interrupting, it really is inspiring
fine.
because I can't remember if it was in 16 or 17. I don't remember what year it was nowadays, but I would have never known Shovel Knight had existed had I not seen it played. You play it at Games Done Quick, and I can't remember. I can't remember what year it was, but that's the kind of reach, first of all, that the marathon has. But secondly, those are the kind of things that get us out to play these games, to inspire us to donate. I mean, the whole thing. I mean, it's not just for nothing, and I think that's I'm glad you mentioned it, but I think it's really important that you know that and that everyone knows that we're doing a lot of good with things like GDQs and events like that. So I'm curious then how we went from runner to volunteer or to the other side. Like, when did you decide, or how did you get involved in some of the other things other than running a game?
I have always volunteered ever
That's
since
cool.
my first event. I signed up for Donation Station and Tech, and I forget if I signed up for anything else. I think it was just those. And let's see. I did Graveyard Shift. It was like my tradition to do Graveyard Shift. So again, my first volunteer shift was with Vooligan.
Sensing a theme here.
Yeah, so here's a good way to set a first impression with someone that you're like working under, by the way, is for them to tell you, okay, one of us needs to always be looking at this computer, and that's primarily your job as the stream tech. So make sure you're always at this computer. 10 seconds later, there is an issue over on the stream, like on the stage, and Vooligan and the stage tech walk over, and for some foolish reason, I decide to follow them. And Coolidge says yes, but all like at some point I get like I follow him. And he's like, this is what's happening, but you need to be over at that computer. And I'm like, right, sorry. So that was my first volunteer shift.
I gotta just to add on a little bit. I had my first geek or fanboy moment. Vooligan checked me in this year at AGDQ 2020, just a month ago, and he still does volunteering and stuff like that for these events, which is I mean, you guys have been doing it now for years. So please continue. I just had a little geek moment I wanted to add in there.
No, that's pretty much it. That was the end of the story. It's just like I left a great first impression on my volunteer shift. Well, I guess I did over the course of the week because they kept having me back to do more and more. I eventually had to stop doing the graveyard shift. Not for any bad reason, but it was just like I've always had very bad insomnia, and at AGDQ 17, I actually did not sleep for 5 days.
Oh no, that's not good. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very obvious by the end of it. You can ask Railcoon at the next event. But just like he's like, Muncha, you didn't know where you were probably, or like what day it was. And I'm like, you're right, I didn't, because I did not sleep for 5 days. You know this. You saw this.
No.
But no, it was great.
I do have to say,
wonderful.
I did graveyard shifts at 19S GDQ, and then this at AGDQ I was doing like 3 to 7 in the afternoon, and it felt weird to like be fully awake, had a full meal in me. It's like, this is bizarre. How does that work?
It's very strange.
So you mentioned that nowadays you are on staff with GDQ, and if you can, and if you can't, I understand if there's certain things you can't share. But what do you do nowadays for GDQ as a staff member?
So aside from being the runner liaison, which I guess I'll go over those duties
Sure.
quickly.
Yeah.
The runner liaison, my duties are to greet new runners. Should I be available, of course, I am allowed to eat and have sick days.
But he
Um,
does a damn good job of it. I'm just letting you people know. Okay.
Thank you. But no, my job is to show new runners around and just explain the process. Because now, as you know yourself, having done a couple runs, there's we have it down to like, hey, you go here, you get some makeup, then you go over here. Here's who you need to talk to. And like I show streamers around to be like, here's the practice room, here's the private practice room. Um, if you need anything, please contact me. I'm basically the staff contact for runners should they need anything.
Very cool.
I am also the person that if we need a runner for any reason or need to talk to them for any reason, I am the person that is supposed to track them down. So if I ever text you, like if you are a runner at GDQ and I ever text you, hi, we need you in the stream room now. Please, I'm not trying to be pushy. I'm just doing my job. And you really, really, really need to go to the stream room. Anyway.
You are missing your chance if you're not in the stream room right now. I'm just saying.
Yes, that actually has almost happened sometimes. But like I said during an interview at AGDQ with Sent, my favorite thing is showing new runners around and just kind of demystifying the whole process. And I've tried to do that over the years anyway at AGDQ, at Calithon, because like it's a very nebulous thing if you've never done a live event. Like, well, what do I do? Like, there's a big stage. This is kind of scary, somewhat, because we're all nerds. Some nerds aren't as, they fear the limelight to some extent sometimes. But
if you don't mind, I'm going to touch on that for just a second.
Sure.
Because I've actually one of the things I discovered at my first GDQ is I guess surprised to be the right word, but there are many streamers who are introverts, and some of the more popular streamers are actually introverts, which I found interesting because something like a liaison really helps break down that barrier. I am not, nor do I get nervous or anything like that, but it did. I was curious. I've watched this event now for years, and it definitely helped ground it a little bit, if you will. And I appreciated that there was somebody like you doing what you did, because it just made it so much. It put me at ease, to say the least, for this type of thing.
Yeah. Well, without me, then they'd have people continuing to go backstage and harass Uranium Anchor. And we shouldn't be bugging him. He needs to work on the tracker.
And I think he's always got he's always at that table, like working.
Yep, he's always there. That's his desk. Unfortunately, for some silly reason, at like AGDQ 16, he was positioned right next to the door and was the most accessible staff member.
Oh no, poor guy.
And so like I said, there didn't used to be, a staff point of contact that was like well known. And to this day, still people just contact whoever they know, and eventually it gets forwarded along. But like, if I sometimes did use, I don't want to say use my status, but it was more I held in good faith that people would know if I was backstage. I wasn't there to cause trouble. I was just there because I needed something, probably.
Yeah, that's your position. And it's totally understandable.
And so because oftentimes I was a runner, so it was probably like, oh, there's a runner here. What do you need? You must need help with something. I hope that was the reason and not go away. But anyway, so like oftentimes I would come backstage just to like find out the answer to a question or like for somebody or something. When my friend Fur had a run of Hyper Light Drifter, I tried to show him around and was like, okay, here's the PC. I already installed the game for you. Here's how the thing works, blah, blah, blah. So like I've always tried to do these liaison like things on my own anyway, just because no one did it for me. So someone may as well do it for you.
Well, it really does. I'm not kidding. It makes you feel very important and celebrity, like the fact that there's somebody walking you around. And also the production helps out too. I mean, you see all these cameras around and lights and all these things, you have a makeup person, there's a green room. The whole thing is just, it really has a really nice appeal to it. If you don't mind me asking, so I think I've discussed this with others, but I believe you're part of the game selection committee. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And you mentioned that you still like to submit runs. Like I was talking to Mike Uyama, and he still has to submit his runs. How does that work, being on the committee and also submitting runs at the same time?
So any committee member does not speak up in discussions of games that they submit, whether or not like say I submit a Hyper Light Drifter, like I don't talk about my run, and I also don't talk about anyone else's run that submits that game
Cool.
unless it's just a general question of like, hey, how does this category work?
Right.
Like stuff like that is answered. Or like, hey, are there donation incentives? You know, things that you wouldn't be able to get just from watching a speed run, and you need someone knowledgeable about the game to say it. Second, no committee member can ever talk about any game that they have worked on. That actually wasn't a rule before I was on staff, because until then, the only like two people that were actually no, I take that back. Sumi also used to work for Bandai Namco. I think that's the company name. So like she doesn't take part in any discussions involving any of their products, and she still doesn't, even though she doesn't work for them anymore. But so like those are the two rules. If you submit a game, you don't get to take part in discussions about that outside of general questions. And if you have worked on the game, you don't get to have any say as to whether or not it's in the marathon.
And that seems perfectly fair and reasonable. How long have you been doing the game selection thing? I know. I think did you do for Calathon and others? But I mean,
it's been 1 year since I was hired by GDQ. I was hired after HEDQ 2019 because that was Vuligin's last event.
Oh, very cool, very cool. And how do you like it? What's the challenges, the appeals? What's it like being on that?
I love it personally. It's honestly like the most rewarding thing in my life is like going to these things and making them happen. And I honestly feel like I don't work hard enough or like do enough for these events. But then I don't take into consideration like how important choosing the game selections and all that stuff is. But I don't know. It's just like I think about like, our programming team and all of them and how much knowledge they have and like specialties. And I'm just like, I know a lot about The Legend of Zelda. Yeah. That's why I'm around. But no, it's a lot of fun. It's, there's some not fun parts like there is with any job. But it's not about work hours. Like the hours I have to work to put in for that job are great. It's just sometimes there's discussions that are very difficult to have, and it's just the nature of running a large event is that those discussions come up.
Well, if I may, it's important what you do because I part of it. This is my opinion, but part of the growth that I've seen with GDQ is that the games are always wonderful. They're always entertaining. They're always the reason to keep watching. You always discover something new. The streamers and the games. I mean, sorry, the runners and the games are what the biggest thing that keeps pushing this thing. And so it's an important job, and the fact that you have the knowledge. I know I'm glad somebody like you is on a committee like that because of all the knowledge that you bring to it, like the fact that you do know everything about now you know a lot about Zelda. I think that's super important to it. And
I know a wee bit about The Legend of Zelda, not as much as the Zelda speedrunning community, of course, but like I have played almost every Zelda game, so I have a cursory knowledge of most of them.
Well, absolutely.
My favorite is Twilight Princess, by the way. That is my favorite.
Twilight Princess. Wow. Okay. I don't meet many people who that's their favorite, but that's a great one. I love Twilight Princess.
Yeah.
Have they done an HD remaster of that one?
They did on the Wii U.
Okay.
I have not played it. So disclaimer, my favorite version and the only version I've ever played is the Wii version.
Oh.
It is the reason I bought a Nintendo Wii on launch day, was to play it a month early and rub it in my friend's face. I did exactly that.
You're one of the few I've heard who I know who prefers the Wii. I'm definitely a GameCube person when it comes to Twilight Princess, but that's pretty cool. So you enjoy the motion controls and everything.
I did. My favorite part was the bow and arrow. It was so much fun.
It made you feel like Link. I got to give you on that one. Okay, so before we went down this rabbit hole, we were working in our way to you're working at Yacht Club Games, and you mentioned GDQ.
Yes.
How do we get there? How do we get from speedrunning, Shovel Knight, GDQ, all that kind of stuff to Yacht Club Games?
So, let's see. Back in like late 2014, I was regularly streaming speedruns of Shovel Knight, low percent, and I would always watch my friends' streams, Taiwan Ninja, Busta Wolf, Engage, etc. And anytime one of us would be streaming, the same person would always come into our chat and say some stuff occasionally, and his name was Shane YCG. And it wasn't until one of Busta's streams that like Busta looked down and was like, "Wait, that stand for Yacht Club Games? And Shane was like, yes, I'm an engine programmer over there. And we're like, oh, okay, cool. So like Shane, for a while, Shane was like sort of our emissary to the dev team, if you will, just like voicing concerns that the community had or like questions and stuff. But I believe it was also Shane's idea to give speedrunners access to beta stuff. So like myself and a few others were actually given access to the Plague Knight beta. Not as paid testers or anything, but just as like a general feedback. And they do that for plenty of people, by the way. It's
That's
also
cool.
like a media thing that happens. Like that just happens in the industry.
That's cool. That's cool.
And like I'm allowed to say that I was, I played that, by the way. All these years later I am.
Yeah.
But anyway, I played the Plague beta, and I tried to give as much feedback as I could, and let them know what I thought about various items and any bugs I may have found. But like I was still very green as far as the bug finding went at that point. So like I didn't have a knowledge of how video games could break and how to interact with programs in that sort of way. But we'll get to that in a little bit. And so
but you definitely had a strong foundation because of the way you've been approaching speedruns. That's pretty interesting, the
yes.
fundamentals and things like that. That's cool.
Yeah. And so after that, like I continued playing Shovel Knight and they continued having interest in having me try stuff. And then like Spectre Knight beta came at some point, a couple years later, and a bunch of us got to play a bit of that. And then to finish up Spectre of Torment, I actually worked remotely as a tester, which is very, very rare, by the way, that they would ever, like any company would ever allow anyone like that's not a permanent hire to do anything like that. But I had a VPN. I was able to connect and get builds.
If I may, is the reason that that's kind of a rare thing because of the nature of the state that the game's in at that time, or what makes that kind of?
It's rare because, you think, just like you're basically like you're asking someone to like have access to material that is not known to the public yet, and you are placing a large amount of trust in them to not distribute that in any way, shape, or form.
And that's why you keep it in house. No, that makes a lot of sense. I totally understand.
Yes, yes,
absolutely.
And so, like they placed a lot of trust in me, and I'm very thankful to them for that. But so I worked for a month remotely. I think I worked a total of maybe like 65 hours because I was just doing it like after work and on my weekends. But I would just do whatever random tasks they would have me, like someone look into. And because I had familiarity with Shovel and Plague, like they'd also just hired like my actual lead now, Adam. And so since I was more familiar with the previous content, he would often have me check the stuff in there. Just like a quick note, when you're making a game like Shovel Knight, Shovel Knight was not designed to be modular, so everything uses and references everything else.
Oh, interesting.
Meaning, at any given time, anything and everything can break for practically no reason.
So it doesn't just break one room or one level; it can break the entire game. One thing, one bug.
Exactly.
Wow,
exactly.
Crazy. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I wish I could like give a more specific example.
No, it's okay.
Like it basically that because of that, like they would have me do the old content, like I said, and like immediately I immediately found a lot of things that like would have happened because they were very obvious. I wasn't like super good at breaking anything, but it was just nice to have someone that was essentially do the game inside and out, just like the level designers did, and knew how and where to like find all the content and make sure everything worked. One of my tasks was playing through all of Plague of Shadows and all of Spectre of Torment in Brazilian Portuguese to see if there were any errors. Like formatting errors or instances of null. I do not speak Brazilian Portuguese, mind you. But I certainly know that parentheses null parentheses probably isn't Brazilian Portuguese.
Might be right on that.
Yeah.
Dog Developer was in the chat. He speaks Portuguese, Brazilian, so how funny.
Nice.
Anyway.
So basically after that, like that was my little stint working remotely, and then Spectre was done and it was out and everything. And at that time in my life, I was really, really trying to find a new job, and I didn't know what to do. So I was like applying at a bunch of places. I had a couple interviews, but I didn't land anything. And so in about May, it's about 4 months after the remote QA work, um, I thought to myself, well, Yacht Club is working on new stuff. They'll probably need some people for a little bit later this year. Maybe I'll just like see if I can move down there for, a few months. I'll keep some stuff up here in like NorCal and storage. Um, and then I'll have some industry experience and just see where I go. Because I hated my job at the time. And I think I messaged Shane. And I was like, oh, hey, I'm trying to look for a new job. What do you think you'll need testers later this year or whenever? If so, let me know. And I'd like to arrange moving down there to try it. And I'm dead serious because if we have been trying to arrange something like that for a little bit, because Shane thought I could be really good at it. And I was expecting like, oh, yeah, we'll be looking for people like in September or like this time next year or something.
Totally.
But he was like, let me talk to Adam. I'll get back to you. And then like 20, 30 minutes later or something. Actually, yeah, when can you start? I'm like, let me talk to Adam. And so basically then it was decided that I would start as soon as I could, which was in July. It was 2 weeks after SGDQ 2017. So I moved to LA, and thanks to a lot of help from some family and friends, I've been able to live down here and stay here. I forget that, and then I look around my room and I remember where I am in life. And it honestly does inspire me to work a little harder. It's been rough adjusting to this sort of life, honestly. This is the first time I've ever lived very far away from a lot of family. I didn't go away for college or anything like that. So it's taken some adjusting, but overall I'm happy.
Does being in-house, does that change how you approach your job, or is it enable certain things, or what are the benefits, I guess, of being in-house?
Well, I learned a hell of a lot more being in-house, obviously. Awesome. Just because you're there, and I'm not around the dev team a whole lot, but still I get it's just nice to be able to get answers to questions or occasionally have things explained to you as far as the nitty-gritty. Much to my own chagrin, I have not made much progress on my own time to become much of a developer. But we'll work on that. But I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about Visual Studio. I don't have a computer science background or anything. I have a mild IT background. So learning about all these different dev environments and how to install builds on dev kits, which strangely enough is not as simple sometimes as inserting a USB drive and clicking install, unfortunately. But yeah, I learned a lot about how game development as a whole works, and that's something I value.
You mentioned not having a computer science background. One of the things that you and two others, and I'm sorry I can't remember their names, but you guys presented this panel at AGDQ 2020.
Oh yeah.
And I'll let you, if you remember their names, because I'm sorry I can't remember their screen names. But
that was Chris or Studio.
Okay.
And the other gentleman's name was Dylan. I do not remember his username, but we don't, because we just use our real names.
Really? Yeah, because you work in the real world.
Yeah, Studio works. He's worked in the industry for several years now. But he right now works as a producer. And Dylan is a designer at Gunfire Games. He's worked on Darksiders and stuff.
And so I've spoken to a couple other devs on the podcast, and that's one of the things that I've taken away is that you don't necessarily need to be a computer scientist or a programmer to work in games. There are all these different facets to development, and it's testing. They need testers, and I think that that's awesome. And I think it's also great that you are curious and you do want to try out some of these other things. But there was this avenue here for you, which was great, which is testing, and I think it's great to know that there are other opportunities if people want to walk or work in the games industry.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely true. It can be tough to get in.
Sure.
I mean, it's very tough to get in. I'm very lucky, of course. I'm qualified, but I'm lucky. And just quick side note, my advice is if you want to get into games, Like no matter what your discipline is, like you have to work very hard. You really do. Um, Especially if you're going for like a mid or senior position, at somewhere like in an indie studio, because they need very qualified people to do the work. Um, so just it, and that goes for like a lot of industries, especially anything entertainment wise, but like games especially, like you need to know so much, and I that's something that I need to work on myself. So I'm falling on my own sword here.
Right.
Um, but like there's just so much. Making games is hard work. It is extremely hard work, and it takes a village.
Dog Developer says there is no make game button. No, not so much, right?
That is so correct.
Well,
Like, okay, like other side note, Mario Maker, like the fact that that level editor, like you can just place an object and it has all its properties associated with it automatically. Do you know how hard that is to set up? If I want one enemy in Shovel Knight to like do a thing, I have to click like 17 different things and type a bunch.
that's what
Anyway.
that's what blows my mind about the Super Mario World editor that the community has created. Like that's an incredibly powerful tool they've created, and I've
Mhm.
totally drawn a blank on the name of what the editor's name is. But like the fact that something like that exists and people did it for free, which is just mind-boggling. I mean, you're right; those things are just not easy to do. I would assume.
Mm-mm.
Well, and I think there is at least in my experience in my career. So you mentioned entertainment. I work in production. There is a certain level of luck to anything we do. Before this
Mhm.
episode, I spoke with Pid01, who is a developer, and she was part of the SMRPG rando development community. And like you're saying, your story takes you from running the game to GDQ to these certain things that just happen along the way. And yes, there is the luck effort part, but to your point, if you work your ass off and you put in the time, you can there are opportunities that can happen with a little bit of
Mhm.
luck. So very cool. So when I'm very curious about QA testing and when you obviously you're breaking or you're testing the game during the development cycle, but is there a time where testing gets cut off or like where hey we need to ship, like when does that actually happen in the development cycle,
Um, I'm honestly not sure
or
because
does
like
it?
this is still my first gig. Uh, there still is a time when it's like, okay, this is our ship date, and this is like what we're going with. And like there is still that reality of like, okay, we're shipping, and whatever's in there is in there. And then we have to deal with that later.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you
and that's the
test?
case with every game.
Do you test games that have been shipped or versions that have been shipped? I should say.
Yes.
Okay.
So like a lot of the work when I first got there, actually, like back in 2017, was because obviously King Knight didn't exist yet. Um, was like we were still working on stuff that was known about in Shovel, Plague, or Spectre, and polishing those up for another patch. Um, and so yeah, I do still like I'm still working on Shovel Knight right now because we're still trying to get the final things out and just try and make sure it's as bug free as possible.
There's one of the things Shovel Knight's so popular, which is awesome. Are you ever surprised by any, we'll call them bugs, that the community discovers that maybe you didn't get through testing,
Um,
or do you get a lot of them, or do you
No,
find them?
like I wouldn't say that like there's bugs that I'm surprised about. There's more so that there's bugs that I'm like, oh man, like
Hmm.
I would have caught that had I just like taken a moment to do that, but like it's one of those things where it's just not if you're not in the mindset to be thinking about that sort of interaction, you just aren't going to be thinking about it. Um, and again, going back to like Shovel Knight being a game where everything references everything else as far as the code goes, as far as I understand it, anyway. Um, like, it, there's some interactions that I'm like, I checked for this exact thing. Like, we fixed this exact thing like a year ago.
Why is it
Why is
not?
it here?
No.
And the reason is just like something happened somewhere and it reverted for some reason, or it something else is causing it to happen again. And like those are the types of things that I'm just like they just make me feel like I failed. But I know I didn't fail because there's still all the other things that I did find. Um, so it like QA is rough in that regard because like there's never a point where you just get to sit back and look at the thing and go, yes, it's done, it's good, and people get to love it. It's
Brutal.
just It's just I still have to find the remaining bugs.
There's
And
never
then
a sense of completion. That sounds so
there's
brutal.
there's really not, honestly. It's something that I think honestly is affecting me and that I need to
Mm.
figure out. But that's another that's a thing for me to work on in my own time.
Right.
I mean, maybe it's just a me issue, and that's
Uh,
actually not a thing. But we'll see.
I mean, I'm just taking a guess here, but through our conversation, I'm assuming that's one of the things that make you good at your job is that you're always looking for what's next. But as a person, that's got to be challenging to if that's your approach.
It's very challenging, especially like because I'm the type of person. I don't know why I'm this way, but like I get very invested in a hobby, and then after like X amount of time or so long, I just like I need to do something else
Right.
and not do that thing for a long time because I am like I'm done with it. I don't
Yeah,
want to touch it
got
anymore.
to put it behind you.
Um, and like that's been the case for me for a long time. Like League of Legends, played it for 2 years, quit. Dota, played for a year, quit. Borderlands, like same thing. Fighting games over and
Oh
over.
man.
Like I don't know if it's because I can't commit or just because I really like learning things.
Right.
I often wonder if my time, in the public school system, made me this way because it's like, okay, now you're doing this 6 months later. Okay, now you're
Mm.
doing this. So maybe I'm just used to a change. But like, even at this point, um, I would like to do things other than just play Shovel Knight, even though I know I'm very good at it.
Right. Well, and that's I mean it's the joys of I guess being an adult. We we want to pay our rent and put food on the table and things like that.
Yes.
If you don't mind, they're one of the adages I've heard from development or something like that is that sometimes I'll hear, "Hey, that's not a bug, that's a feature." Does that actually ever happen in real life? That maybe there's something that happens that's a bug that you guys actually think makes the game better, or maybe perhaps makes you
Uh,
think of the game differently?
Let me think. Like there's nothing that I can really think of right now from my time in QA, but like something that's used in the Shovel Knight speedrun, that like was a bug, but it like became a feature was when you swing your shovel and you're standing on the ground, if you press jump, you will cancel your attack. And at first they were going to fix that, but as they had more people playtest, they were like, no, this is cool because like now I can like do some cool stuff and move faster and whatnot.
Right.
Um,
Oh, interesting.
and so like that is like a core thing in the
Yeah.
speed run is that's like it, it, basically you can tell how good someone is at Shovel Knight, how practiced they are by how well they do their jump cancels.
Hmm.
And like the game would be completely different if it didn't have that. um
That's crazy because that's a huge thing. That's like basic gameplay. Like that's wow.
mhm.
That's kind of crazy that was
uh,
considered one of them.
Actually there's one more that I can think of that might qualify in the Plains of Passage. And I'm allowed to talk about this, and I'll explain why later. So, in the Plains of Passage, the very first level, there is a skip you can do on a screen with one of the bubble dragons, where you bounce off the bubbles and hit a screen transition 2 screens above you, from what I can tell.
Wow.
And this essentially, like, kind of screen wraps or something your character, and skips a couple of rooms. In total, it saves like 4 seconds or something if you get it right. And it's only possible in this spot because of the level layout. Um, and before it used to look really buggy, like you'd see a weird camera transition and all this stuff. And depending on how you moved in there, you could actually get your character stuck there, and the screen would forever try to scroll. Um, and so to fix the characters getting stuck, but to preserve the use of that skip for the speed run, it was actually changed so that if you perform these things correctly, it still takes the same amount of time, but very smoothly transitions you to the actually a more advantageous position. So it actually was made better.
Oh yeah.
So I guess there is a bug that has now become a feature. It even plays a nice little jingle when you do it.
Oh, does it really?
Yes,
That's so
yes,
awesome.
yes. Ian, with the gameplay programmer who implemented that, he worked very hard to get all that, and he asked me, very earnestly, like, do you think people will like it? Is this
Oh hell
okay?
yes.
And I'm like, dude, this is great. It plays a sound. People will love this. And like the Discord went nuts when they
Yeah.
found it. because I didn't tell anybody that that was
Oh,
changed.
so cool. So they get
Um,
to discover it. That's so great.
yeah, and so as people were trying it, they were like, "Wait, was this made better and stuff?" Yeah, awesome. So yeah.
And that's I gotta be. I mean, and I know I'm complimenting the developers quite a bit, but the game is just so joyous to play, and I think that's one of the reasons. By the way, is because it's obvious the developers care about those little things. That just those
Mhm.
little touches, make such a huge. They're wonderful. They're wonderful experiences to get like for the first time and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Okay, so is there ever a point where I don't always know, I don't know the ins and outs obviously of QA testing. Does a QA tester ever suggest a feature or something added or subtracted from a level? Does it work that way?
Yes. It mind you, that's also very rare in QA because
Okay.
very rarely, in fact, practically never does a QA team directly work with like the development team.
Oh, okay.
Um, like that's practically unheard of, and like most indie companies don't have their own in-house QA in any capacity, aside
Ah,
from maybe one person.
got it.
Um, so
So they
like
outsource
that,
it or contract it or whatever they're gonna do to
essentially,
do that.
yeah, like
Okay.
it's usually like if you're working with a publisher, the publisher
Mm,
handles like paying for all that and arranging it,
got
etc.
got it.
Um, but like there have been instances where I'm like, hey, I think this would work a little better if like this didn't happen, or like like this also happens where like, hey, this level layout doesn't work because if I do this, I can get stuck here, or like, hey, I can
Mm,
get to this thing early. Um, and so like those are still just like obvious issues to some extent. Even though I say obvious and then I get back, I didn't even know you could do that, and I'm like, what? It's right there. But anyway, like I can't get any super
sure,
specific
sure.
examples,
No, no.
unfortunately. But like yes, that does happen. Mind you, it takes a very compassionate and earnest dev team to like listen when people say things like that. Um, because like ultimately it's their game. And I'm not saying this about Yacht Club. I'm just saying
No.
in general, like ultimately it's their game. They could tell you to pound sand if for all they care.
Right. And
Um,
one of the things I was made abundantly clear too by the panel that you presented was that there are different scales and budgets for anything, and sometimes you just don't have the resources and the money and the time to do X, Y, and Z or whatever. You only can do X and Y. So, and
mhm.
I think that's probably the case with any business whenever you're creating any sort of product, but definitely in game development where you only have a certain amount of time and money to do certain things. So
Yep.
that's pretty cool. Dog Developer says in the chat, and she's making a joke, I think, but he says, "Who do I blame for the delay on King of Cards?" And he says, "By the way, it was totally worth the wait. He loved the campaign."
Uh, I don't know. That was honestly, that's just because they kept having more ideas, and they're like, we have to make it better.
God,
Are
that's
you
so
sure?
great.
Yes.
That
So,
I gotta tell you, and maybe I don't know if you've experienced this, but the culture of gaming seems to be a lot more understanding of delays in the past couple of years because
mm,
we want the games to be better when we get them. We want the games to feel as good as they can when we get them on day one.
yeah. Well, I think that's a response to like a lot of people around our age, or like our age bracket
Yeah.
rather. We are the first generation really that grew up with video games, and we kind of harken back for a time when you went and bought a game at the store and it was a complete product, for
Right.
lack of better terms.
Mm-hmm.
And I think today, especially for the last 20 years essentially, people have just gotten used to games being super buggy on launch and like requiring these ridiculous day one
Oh yeah.
patches. And like we hear all these stories about awful crunch at studios and whatnot, or
Yes.
people getting let go. um, and I think it's also just nice that it's a double-edged sword in my opinion, but it is nice that to some extent, like if you want to talk to Bob at game company Z, like you have to email Bob at gamecompanyz.com,
Yes.
and like you'll be able to talk to Bob probably. um but like it's nice that if everyone is what's the word I want to use, if everyone is jovial, uh a dev team and a community can have a very good very healthy relationship. Um, and I think that especially in response to like an indie game, people feel a lot more personal connection with the makers of those games, especially because like you can just go to PAX and meet the people that constructed your favorite game, of recent memory. And I think that's really valuable. And it adds another level of, or another reminder that, hey, people make video games. They are just people. I can go talk to them.
I've noticed, there are a lot of people in the speedrunning community who are developers. They may not be game developers, but they're software developers, they're engineers, they're these type of people. And
Mm.
when just recently Final Fantasy VII, they're pushing it back a month. And the first tweets that I saw, so many of them were about, if that gives the team a chance where they don't have to, not see their families for a month, then that's great. Now,
Oh,
who knows if that's what happened with Square Enix or not? But the fact that
oh
the people are
no.
reacting positively to that, I appreciate that. Now, Square Enix is a huge company, so who the hell knows? It's probably I don't know what's up with that, with what their reason was, but
Yeah. I mean, I have no inside information. I
sure.
have no idea, but like it just if you also look, the similar thing was like a delay was announced for, I think it was Cyberpunk, and ooh, boy howdy, I can tell you they are definitely crunching,
And that
probably at
got
this
pushed to the end
exact
of the
moment in
year.
time.
Yeah, that's crazy,
Yeah. So
Uh,
I'm gonna hope the Final Fantasy team is also not crunching, but most likely they're
they are.
probably crunching.
And I will be so in my day job. I would know there is definitely a rush, and there's something appealing to that crunch time. I will just say it out loud because there are,
Mm,
as much as you don't want to, we do want to see people take care of their mental health and things like that. There's also this excitement about doing the crunch. So as long as like everything,
mm.
if it's in moderation, it's probably something that maybe. I'm sorry. It can be something that can not necessarily be such a drag and such a bad thing.
Yeah. Like I'm that same way actually. If it's a rare occasion, I actually enjoy feeling like the extra mastery of, yes, I'm putting in
Mm,
these long hours and doing my part for the team or whatever. It's nice to be going through that, especially if you're there with a group, because
yeah.
it's like, okay, we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also doing that for a month straight, 6 days a week,
That yeah.
it it changes you in ways you do not expect, and affects you like in ways you do not expect for many months, excuse me, afterward. Um, like we have not crunched at Yacht Club. We had like an extended period of extra work to make sure stuff was okay. Um, but like even then, that was just like 2 weeks of overtime.
Right. See,
But even then, it was just like that was stressful.
well, I do have to say that one of the things I've enjoyed about Shovel Knight is that we've heard from many, and the dev team is participating in the community, and we get to hear from them, and their when they can share things, they seem to consider the community as they continue to do new releases, new updates, new DLC, all this kind of stuff. And I think that's one of the things that another thing that makes the game so great and so wonderful.
Mm.
So, I hear a dog developer in the chat says, a delayed game is only delayed until it comes out. A bad game is a bad game forever. Miyamoto.
Hmm.
Of course. I mean, that's really, there's definitely some truth to that for sure. So I'm curious. Okay. So, first of all, thank you for sharing all of that stuff. It's tremendous insight, and it's really interesting. I think I may have asked this question during the panel, but why? What correlation is there between speedrunning and development, or maybe if you could speak to QA testing specifically, but maybe other areas of development,
Oh.
because there are a lot of speedrunners who work in development.
Hmm. Well, I could talk a little bit about. I did get to do a little bit of level design stuff for King of Cards.
Cool,
I designed two of his challenge mode levels,
cool.
and so like for me, when I was constructing those, like the things I was hoping to do, because they used two of like King Knight's extra armors. I was hoping to like give players uh, levels that would teach them how that item functions and would inspire them to try using it in the campaign if they had not yet already. Um, and so, like from a level design perspective, um, like mind you, I don't necessarily think anyone should design specifically for speedrunners, but like just in a general level design perspective, you're trying to create something that is uh, palatable for someone who has never played a video game before in their life, while at the same time creating something that has enough interesting parts to it to where a seasoned player will still find some enjoyment out of mastering it. Um, and as on a level design front, that's a skill that takes a very long time to learn. Um, and it's about looking at like all the mechanics you're trying to use, and it's about thinking of all the different ways that they can be, implemented, and ways that they can be made interesting. Like look at Mario's move set. What can Mario do? He can run left and right, he can jump, maybe he can shoot some fireballs, he can bounce off of stuff. So, how do you make those actions interesting? Okay, well, if maybe you're running to the right and maybe you're going to, just run in sequence and jump a little bit. Oh, but maybe you have to turn around really fast, or maybe there's an enemy in your way. So it's about making interesting interactions. And then as far as speedrunning and QA goes, there's obviously a lot of overlap between, general game knowledge as far as how the character operates, how, or is supposed to operate rather, how menus function, etc. And then like routing does come into play because like, one of my tasks is, hey, we need someone to earn every achievement in the game. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this so it doesn't take 2 weeks. I'm gonna get this done in 3 days, and I did. um, and like routing is always like, it's honestly very fun for me. It's always a fun process, especially if I already know the thing in and out. Like for King of Cards, there's a card game component, and one of the things I obviously have to check is, what if you did just the card game while playing through the game, or like you did all of like today, beat the game and beat all the card game section, and so I routed all that out and was like, okay, do this, do this, do this, blah blah blah, and it's just a nice satisfying feeling to be like, oh, how do I take this seemingly large or long, list of tasks and complete it in a very short amount of time. But
That's
yeah.
that's cool that you actually get to do those things, or that those skills carry over to the QA testing. I would say as a speedrunner, I run a lot of TurboGrafx 16 games, so a lot of the games haven't been routed, and routing is one of my favorite things to do. It's like it's really creative, and it's a lot of trial and error, and there's a lot of different things you can try to, but you can really try anything at that when you're doing a route, which is awesome, and time it and all that kind of stuff. So, what? Let's see. As you mentioned earlier that you've played a lot of Shovel Knight in the past few years. Do you get a chance to play any other games? And if so, what games have you played recently or in the past couple of years that you've enjoyed?
So the last couple of months, I've been absolutely addicted to Pokemon Shield because I've always been into the competitive Pokemon scene. Not so into it that I will go breed a competitive team and ever compete, but because it was made so much easier to like make interesting teams, and because there are so many interesting Pokemon being used right now, I've been like knee deep, probably waist deep actually, in like the team development process for that. But like I play practically every genre that's not like RPG or like real-time strategy. I'm not a thinking person in that regard. I really like action games. One of my favorite games I've played the last couple of years was Bayonetta 2. I really like that game. But what else did I play last couple of years? Crosscode was a very fun action RPG. So I try to get some gaming in. I'm kind of at a point in my life where like right now, like gaming it's still there, but I've not spent my life focusing on like developing myself, if that makes sense, at least not in any way that is traditionally meaningful. Like I was a music major, and then I've spent my adult life playing Shovel Knight, and I'm happy with where I am, but I'm ready for the next challenge, if you will.
Oh, that's awesome. I think that's a great way to put it, because I know that especially when there's something you're passionate about, it's easy to what's called tunnel vision, and stay, like you were mentioning earlier, just the type of person you are, right? You're going to focus on that one thing. So that's cool. I think it's really, man, I am not a psychologist or a self-help or anything like that, but one of the best advice I got was you can't help others until you help yourself, type of thing. And I think that's a really important thing, because you could take that to your career or to your family or whatever you want to apply that to. It's a really good adage, if you will.
I agree.
That's so cool. Will you? I was checking your speedrun.com profile and everything like that, and you haven't submitted a PB for Shovel Knight now in a few years. Do you think you'll ever speedrun Shovel Knight or any of the other nights at this point? Do you think you'll ever speedrun the game ever again?
I might. I'm working on King Knight because I kind of want to submit for SGDQ if I think I can have a good enough time.
Cool.
And one day I might go back to like Shovel Knight specifically as kind of like some unfinished business type thing, but I think it might not be for like a couple years until after like I'm not working on Shovel Knight anymore. Because for now I still get like my fix, if you will, at work.
I have to say every day when you go and you're
yeah.
Well, I think that's really cool, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk about it because it's for those of us who are outside of game development, there's definitely. I have a lot of respect for it, and it's always fascinating to hear about what it actually takes to bring a game as popular and as good as Shovel Knight is to the public, to actually something that's a real game. So I appreciate taking the time and sharing all that stuff and all the speedrunning and stuff like that. Thank you so much for doing that.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
If there's a place where people can find you, is there anything you'd like to throw out there like that?
You can follow my Twitter at MunchaKoopas if you feel so inclined. Like I have a YouTube, you can find that by googling MunchaKoopas. I don't really do much with it, but if you have any interest in watching it in my old speedruns or something, there's stuff up on there.
If I may promote it for just a sec, the Shovel Knight Discord is wonderful, and I didn't even realize that you actually started it. My apologies for not realizing that, but there's so much. It's such a I don't know. I find the community really pretty awesome and very welcoming, to say the least.
Yeah, we've tried to make sure we're always very polite and welcoming of new people. Like everyone there, I'm sure it's the case with many speedrun communities. Like, people are happy to talk about the thing they're passionate about, especially if you are also interested in becoming passionate about it. And yeah, we have a lot of great resources, so hit up the speedrun.com page for the Discord link if you feel so inclined. And, I'll see you online.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free to share it with family, friends, and leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. All of those go a really long way to helping out the podcast. Thank you so much. Have a good one.